Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me for this Better Cotton's Virtual Implementing Partners meeting 2022. So I'm here and happy to share my insights about inclusive and system-oriented approach to promoting adoption of new practices. So straight to my presentation. I will share some theories first and then give you some practical examples from Ethiopia on soil and water conservation and conclude my presentation with some lessons for future implementations. So I'm going to take you through some approaches that has been developed so far in agricultural innovation. So trying to increase the adoption of new practices, different approaches have been used in the past and also currently being promoted as the best approach. So if we go back in the 1960s, it's a linear approach that has been developed. It's a supply of technology from researchers to farmers. So we can see the different characteristics of these different approaches in the last 16 years, I think. So if you take the linear approach, the main activity is to supply technologies through pipeline. So that's why we call it a linear approach. And the farming system approach has been developed in the 1970s and 1980s, and they were aiming at trying to learn more farmers' constraints through surveys to help them modify the technologies. And then in the 1990s, the participatory approach to innovation has came in play. And then the currently, which is being promoted is a system-oriented or a co-innovation approach. So they are quite different in the way they have been progressively developed is to increase the adoption of new practices. If you see the core elements, you will understand that why technologies have been not more adopted and why we need a new approach. For example, in the core elements, the focus of the linear approach was technology package, which transferred to farmers, and the farming system modifying the same technology package through information they get from survey on farmers' constraint, and then through participatory approach, it's a kind of joint production of knowledge and technologies with farmers. But when it comes to system-oriented approach, it's all about a shared learning and change. When we see the most important, interesting thing I would like to discuss with you here is the role of farmers and role of scientists, how it has been changing through time through these different approaches. If you see the role of farmers, they have been considered as only adopters. So they have no involvement, no engagement with the technology adoptions, and they just receive technologies from researchers through extension, and they were considered as adopters, or if they don't adopt, they are considered as laggards. So farmers have been serving as a source of information through the surveys for farming systems approach, but their role has more become closer to researchers, and they become more experimenters under the participatory approach, where researchers are collaborators and farmers are experimenters. They work together on the farm. But when it comes to system-oriented approach, it's more focusing their role become now partners. Farmers are partners to researchers and also innovators in a way that they are exerting demands. And the role of scientists, they were the only source of knowledge for addressing farmers' constraints. As you know, technologies have been coming from researchers only, but on the farming system, they become a bit experts, and under the participatory approach, they become more collaborators with farmers, and now they are just partners. They are one of many responding to demands, because in the systems-oriented approach, researchers are considered as only one source of knowledge, but ultimately they are not the only one, because responding to farmers' demands can come from different actors, such as private sectors, NGOs, and other stakeholders. When it comes to impacts, what kind of impact we are looking through this, if we use these different approaches? For example, if we use a linear technology transfer approach, the main goal is to change farmers' behavior. like the problem things that farmers are not adopting, so we need to change their behavior to increase adoption of farmers. But that's not always true, because that's why this farming systems approach try to be developed in the 1970s to respond to the problem that was encountered using the linear approach. So because researchers were not getting more information from farmers in what kind of needs they have, they developed a survey trying to understand farmers' constraint and trying to remove farmers' constraints through the surveys, through the information they get through the surveys. So when it comes to participatory, it is interesting that now farmers have been, from considering them as adopters or laggards, they are more becoming empowering them, that they can be collaborators and experimenters with researchers so that they can jointly develop technologies. But when it comes to institutions, still those three past approaches haven't been touched on. So often farmers are also constrained by systems or institutional constraints that that's hindering them from adopting technology. So this system-oriented approach from landscape or system perspective, trying to consider the whole systems or institutions to increase the adoption of technologies. So what do we mean by maybe inclusive and system-oriented approach? That's a good question, because we are going to look into one of the most widely used approach called agriculture innovation systems approach. This is defined as a kind of multi-stakeholder actors coming together, and their main focus is on bringing new products, new processes, or new forms of organization into economic uses. So it's not stopping there, like making sure the new products and new processes are of importance or economic uses, but also looking into the institutional and policy environment that affects their performance, the use of these new products or processes. So how this approach has been implemented, mostly through innovation platforms, which comprises multi-stakeholders in the platform, like farmers, researchers, private sectors, governments, in all this. And this can be established either virtually or also in person. So it can be established at lower level or higher level, or also multi-level. Because if you establish a lower level innovation platforms, the main focus is to engage or increase farmers' involvement in the co-innovation process. But if you establish higher level platforms, it's more of addressing the institutional barriers for innovations to go to scale. So actors who are coming together under the innovation platform are those stakeholders who are facing common issues at either a system, a value chain, or a commodity level, such as a cotton. So what's the practical case study I have from Ethiopia? So there is a project which was a 5 years project. I was part of it. I have been mostly, my role was in this to engage different stakeholders in the research projects so that we can develop a technology that works for the farmers. So this project's goal was to address to improve the resilience of rural livelihoods in the Ethiopian highlands through a landscape approach to improve the natural resource management. One background I can give you here is that this Nile River you see on the picture is taking a lot of soil erosions and like fertile soil from farmers' field, and farmers couldn't able to manage the runoffs and the rainwaters to minimize the soil erosions. And this is during rainy season that you see the same river, Nile River, is changing its color, and this is during when there is no rain. So the first thing we did here was that we tried to understand why the previous approaches didn't help to increase adoption of soil and water conservation practices. So we looked into the approach, and we saw that we did some studies on the diagnostic studies to understand why before we come up into using the new system or inclusive oriented approach. So we identified that mostly in Ethiopia, the approach to agriculture innovation is mostly used as a linear or technology transfer approach. Although there is an understanding that farmers' engagement and farmers' participatory approach is more important to increase the adoption of new practices, but still what is in reality being implemented is kind of pushing technologies to the farmers without engaging them. So you can see here that governments believe there is a problem, and this problem is soil erosion, and government identifies like building soil bunds as a new practice to slow down the runoffs. And then they have a wide kind of big ambition to solve the problem in a short time. And then they decentralize this strategy and request each district officials to identify sites, set annual goals like in kilometers to build the soil bunds. So the way they do this is a kind of campaign every year, annually, like for 13 days, where they mobilize hundreds of farmers to construct these soil bunds. Currently in Ethiopia, it's January now. All the districts are engaging all the farmers, mobilizing them to build the soil bunds. This what is the outcome of this approach? Because it has been implemented for a while, I think, if I'm not mistaken, for 1 or 2 decades now, but still the construction of this soil bunds not yet came into an end. So some of the problem we identified is that these soil bunds are not, these soil bunds are not stabilized. So if you talk to farmers, they can tell you that every year they have to construct it because it's even more exposed for soil erosion in some cases when there's no stones to stabilize the soils. And farmers also think that they are losing yields. They are right in terms of the amount of size of land that's constructed and build these soil bunds in their crop farms. So farmers are not engaged, and they are not convinced why they have to invest their time, labor, as well as land to get a kind of benefit they are going to get in the coming 10 or 10 years, and kind of long-term benefits from managing the natural resource such as the soil. So I call this one a system A approach, and how we move to a system B, I will show you here that we are looking for the theories where it says pushing technologies are not successful, but engaging and empowering farmers can help us at least achieve a sustainability and improve livelihoods, because this is used mostly to achieve short-term quotas, such as like government's ambitious plan of building soil bunds in kilometers. But this one is more creating a sustainable environment for farmers and for other stakeholders. So I will explain this one, how we did this one. So we use innovation platforms as a vehicle or to apply the innovation systems or inclusive approach. So we identify stakeholders, and then we think that their role is going to change through time, from initiation phase through consolidation to performance. So during the initiation phase, the main idea of this innovation systems approach is to understand the problem from systems analysis or market chain approach. So at this stage, we have identified problems, we have identified linkages of actors, we have identified their interests, and get some ideas when it comes to solving the problem. So at this stage, the only thing we expect from other stakeholders, such as private sector, local stakeholders, farmers, is to have an interest, who have an interest in soil and water conservation, who are directly impacted by the problem, and who want to collaborate for a solution. So on the consolidation system improved systems improvements, value addition, and market opportunities. So these are the experimental time implementation period where we are trying to address a problem that has been identified here. So in the performance phase, then after evaluating and testing the technologies, we come up with a new product, new technologies, new institutions, or new market outlets. So their role is changing through time. So what we did first was we engaged farmers. We first engaged farmers to know what they think about this soil erosion, what experience they had in the last 10, 20 years, what kind of solutions they think should be put in place, and from their own perspective, from their own experience. And we bring this knowledge of farmers into a discussion with other stakeholders who we think, or we call them experts, but representing different like disciplinaries such as irrigation, water, livestock, and the whole. From systems perspective, we bring together these actors and establish the innovation platforms. We discuss with them and we prioritize what are the problems for each sites. And from a list of problems, we have identified the top issues that have been identified for the sites. For Geldu district, it was soil erosion. For Fogara district, it was free grazing issue. And for Digga district, it was termite infestation that everyone agrees we can start working something on to address it. So for the new practices that has been suggested from our partners, it is about biological interventions that they suggested. One, to address the problem of soil bund, stabilizing that through planting deciduous grasses, tree lucerne, such as multi-purpose trees, and livestock feeds or forage. So it has two objectives. One is to stabilize the soil bunds that farmers have raised as a problem, and the other was because farmers also said that they lack livestock feed. They have a feed shortage and they can make use of their land efficiently. So by this, we have engaged stakeholders. We did an inclusive participatory action, empowering of all stakeholders. We developed capacity of actors, and it's a process of iterative learning. Now, we start from planning in the first year, implement them, and so through reflection, we modify the technologies. And so it goes for the last 3 years during the implementation. So this stage of consolidation take at least 2 years or 3 years of the project to implement, to test, and reflect on, so that we modify it. So this is what farmers have been planting on their communal grazing land, different forages, and this is what multidisciplinary team came to the site and evaluate what deciduous grass has been planted on the degraded land. And as you can see, it has great biomass for farmers to cut and use it for feeding their livestock. And they have been harvesting this 3 times a year, and they were very happy and glad with the interventions, and also how this grass stabilized the soil. And this has been evaluated from different perspectives in terms of how this is going to be affecting the different crops or livestock and so on. So we came from these systems and to this system, at least in the 3 sites, and we managed to engage actors in modify technologies. As you can see, this was a problem in the first place we start with, and now we see this are the success of the interventions, and farmers have come up with the livestock feed issues, and then we engage livestock experts to plant different grasses in soil bands and stabilize it. So you can see the impact, like we managed to get this landscape approach and integrate the new technologies that has been come into play. So this is what a co-innovation can do and can change. So you might think also that what farmers have contributed in terms of knowledge. I just want to share a simple example that I found was interesting. So when farmers start using these new feed technologies, they start cutting and giving to their livestock. They use it on their land, and there was a big wastage when the livestock are stepping on it and so on. So the scientists also come up with additional emerging technologies. They bring this improved feed trough to help farmers to feed their livestock. But there's also another problem that was identified during the evaluation. Farmers said the oxen, when they are fed, they fight, and one big oxen are overeating while the others are not. So to solve that problem, farmers came up with a new idea that they can build the separations, and these farmers did it for himself and show to other farmers as well that this is how the co-innovations have been playing in our case in Ethiopia. And at the stage of 3, when we finished the project, the role of local stakeholders, including farmers, have changed into ownership of the technologies. And then our role was to backstopping 3 activities. One is how they can sustain the use of the innovation, how they can scale it up, and how this continuous improvement through stakeholders interaction and learning can increase. So the same is for the private sectors, that has been increasing, but our role through time has ended. And when the project phased out, we left the sites. So these are the field days that has been promoting for scaling the innovations to other farmers. So we reached to the level that these farmers have now the knowledge, they have owned the innovations, and they are the one who are sharing the benefits or about the technologies to reach to a wider adoption. So the lessons we learned are like mostly about the power dynamics. It was a bit challenging for us to manage the conflicts between higher level actors and farmers, because the higher level actors think that farmers are not adopting the technologies that they have been doing on the soil bands, but farmers have a good reason for that. So these are the issues that really need to be considered when bringing different stakeholders together. And the other lesson we learn is that especially the demand articulation process is time consuming, because we did from farmers and then we moved to other stakeholders and we list all the problems to prioritize one on the top for each site, and then designing maybe started after 1 or 2 years to start thinking about the innovation that's going to be implemented. So it requires managing conflict, it requires managing the different expectations, and when you have a limited resource, that's also another problem. And finally, the challenge of embedding such new approach within the existing established institution is always a problem, and conflict always exists between allowing the process to evolve by itself while at the pace of stakeholders actually, but versus the need for achieving outcomes for the project. Thanks for listening. This is my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thanks.